Okay, go ahead. I'll be back.
I'm Janet.
Hi, Janet. Selena.
Selena, nice to meet you.
Munda.
Linda, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. It's my wife, Elena. This is Denise. Hi. I taught Denise. She's wonderful. She'll just edit all that out. So I'm going to talk about the transition to parenthood, lesbian non-birth mom. I came up with this language, this name for the lesbian non-birth mom, I decided like mom and So for other mother. One of the main things about it is that there's no language that's really agreed upon. So the role of the non-birth mom is this really new, thanks. That's perfect. I'm Janet.
Jen.
What's your name?
Jen.
Jen.
Hi, Marissa.
Marissa.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, guys. Glad you came. So I'll be focusing a lot on the non-birth mother. Because it's the most vulnerable and the most lesbian role. And that's, I did this dissertation on lesbian non-birth mothers and parents during the transition to parenthood. And so what I did is I interviewed 14 women whose partners carried the child that they're raising together. And I wanted to, there's been no study to date about that population. And I was interested in things like how did the attachment go between those women and kids. I was wondering about gender dynamics and what sort of gender dynamics exist. What else? Plus I think of that role as quintessentially lesbian. You know, it's kind of like not being a biological mother, not being a biological father, but this space in between of kind of like space in between biological mother-father, space in between adoptive mother-father. And I wanted to focus on this kind of couple because I was really interested in thinking about what happens when there's a birth mother who's breastfeeding or can breastfeed. How does that, you know, what does that mean for the non-birth mother in terms of attachment, in terms of child preferences, jealousy, that kind of thing. So I'll be talking a bit about that. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to say that I wrote on the board is humility. I have a 22-year-old daughter and 24-year-old twin stepsons. And before I became a parent, I worked with a lot of different families. And I think that I did not have as humble an attitude as I wish that I had. So I feel like for non-parents who are working with parents, it's really important to find some sort of humility about that. I know for myself, and this was decades ago, I was like, oh, I can help you. I can help you figure out what to do. And until you're a parent, you really can't understand what it's like to be a parent in terms of the relentlessness, in terms of the stress. So that's my first thing, is just find a way to be humble in your work. So I'm going to talk about the transition to parenthood. And there's a lot of ways to transition to parenthood. There's through adoption, there's through surrogacy. You might have a relative who has a baby and they give that baby up for adoption. There's just many, many ways to transition to parenthood. And for heterosexual couples who are doing it a traditional kind of way, they are having sex, making a baby. Now, as people get older who are trying to be parents, there's a lot more infertility. So there's a lot of heterosexual parents who are also dealing with infertility issues. So it turns out that for same-sex couples who want to have a kid, it's an advantage in terms of the planning aspect. So once you have to start planning, it's not easy. You don't know how it's going to go. How are we ever going to have a baby? How are we going to figure this out? Like, sperm banks are really expensive. And do we know anybody who's got some sperm that they'll loan us or give us? You know, what kind of man does a couple or a triad or a single woman, you know, what kind of man is going to be flexible and provide that kind of availability to a lesbian couple or triad or person? And one thing that's pretty consistent about lesbians is that they really want control. So usually, if a man is involved, so there's like a known donor and an unknown donor. And if you have an unknown donor, that's like you go to a sperm bank and there's a like a menu. There's and there's a lot of text about what's this person like. He's 6'4". He's Latin and white, he is into the computers, his mother had alcoholism, you know, so it gives you this kind of feel of that. And then you make some sort of decision based on, often, if it's a couple, the birth mother is gonna have her genes, right? So she's gonna like, and they're looking for sperm. So it's not uncommon to have the sperm donor look like the non-birth mother. That's a pretty common thing. And what else do I want to say about that? Oh, so that's an unknown donor, and there are unknown donors that agree to have their identity be made known to the child when the child is 18 or older, and that's called a yes donor. And then there's no donors. And that is a man who's donating sperm because he wants to make money and he thinks it's a good idea, but he doesn't want his identity known to the child ever. More and more these days, people are choosing identity known donors, and I think it's a really good idea. And then known donors tend to be friends of friends, or, you know, the social arrangements become very complicated. One woman I interviewed, their sperm donor was the first boyfriend of the birth mother's sister. So it's like, you know, there's just all sorts of ways to connect up with men who are willing to donate sperm. And if you have a known donor, then the whole question is, what kind of arrangements are there going to be? You know, are you going to have an arrangement where the known donor participates in the parenting or not? Does the known donor want to participate in the parenting or not? If the known donor is gay or queer, then it's likely that they might want to have some sort of parenting involvement. But usually minimal. You know, maybe they'll get the kid one weekend night, or the lesbian parents will sort of watch. It's like, you know, you're on probation, kind of, you know, this guy is on probation, and the lesbian parents are sort of seeing how they're doing, and can we trust this guy? One woman I interviewed, she and her partner lived out in the suburbs. They had 3 kids. They started out with 1. They met this gay male couple at a church, Catholic church, and they decided that they were gonna make a baby together. So they did do that, and this woman got pregnant the first time. And they weren't really quite prepared when she got pregnant. It was like, oh my God, we thought it was gonna take 6 months, because there's some sort of average of like 6 to 9 months, you know, in terms of inseminating. If you go to a sperm bank, then often the sperm is frozen and not fresh, and often frozen sperm takes longer to work. It's a little less effective. So they got pregnant right away and went through pregnancy, labor, and then I think their arrangement was that this gay male couple was going to have some, participation, but mostly they were going to be to the side, if you will. And they totally respected that. As they got to know each other, the couples, they liked each other more and more. It was very successful. It worked out really well. So the lesbian couple, I guess after about a year, went back to the gay male couple and said, "You want to do this again?" And they said, "Yeah, we definitely want to do this again." So they did it again. She got pregnant on the first try again, and it all happened. And so that couple, I would say, is a good example of their transition to parenthood was sooner than they expected. So, and they both were into being parents. Actually, there was some discrepancy. The birth mother really wanted to be a parent. As her partner described her, she was like a big kid herself. And she would just go out and play with kids all the time, if she had a choice. And her partner, the one I interviewed, had less of a desire for being a parent. And so that's a really big thing in a couple when you have some sort of discrepancy of desire around, I really want to be a parent, my partner does not. How are we going to work that out? So when you're working with people around that, heterosexual and same-sex couples, that's a very important thing to think about. They decided to go for it. And one way that changed their lives is that by the second kid, what happened was that the gay male couple bought this SUV, and they started taking the kids on the weekend. So it was a very positive kind of working relationship that they had. It doesn't always work like that. Then they had a third kid, and that also happened, where every weekend the kids would go, a father would pick up the kids on Friday after school, and then they'd be there all weekend. And so that was a great gift for the moms. Let's see, what else? And the gay male couple asked the lesbian couple, they said, "Listen, we'd really like to be full-time parents. Would you agree to being pregnant and having a child, and then we would raise the child?" So the couple thought about that, and they decided no, they didn't want to do that. They thought that would be weird for the kid, and it might feel, might not work out in some way. But that's the kind of example of things where they sort of go once you start this thing. What else? So transition to parenthood. The couples that I interviewed, they were couples who had been together, I think like 2 years and up, and none of them fell in a category where, for example, one partner donated her eggs to the other partner. So that's another kind of situation. There's several situations where, let's say that there's infertility in the couple, and so one woman can donate her egg to the other woman. So the gestational mother is not the biological mother. So it gets sort of complicated. That makes me think also about the sperm donor. Some couples decide that they want to use the non-birth mother's male relative. So that's like a brother, a cousin, something like that. And the first time that I heard that, which is like now going back decades, I just thought, oh my God, that's like incest. There's something that, I don't know, just gave me this bad taste. It just seemed weird to me. But now, lots of people have done it, thousands and thousands, and it seems to be working out well. So, what it means is that the sperm donor is the biological father, and he is the social uncle. And at some point they say, Uncle Mark helped us to make you. He was so nice to us. And I interviewed a couple of women who that was the case in their family relationship. And it took a little while for the grandparents to get comfortable with that. But then there was a way also that was sort of gratifying for the grandparents, for the non-birth mother's parents, because it was like, okay, well, we're going to have a biological connection to this baby. So they came around to that. And that is, in general, what happens for grandparents, is they tend to come around once there's a baby. Okay, so let's see, transition to parenthood. So the main thing is discrepancy and desire between parents or the partners, and how are they going to negotiate that? And they often come to therapy. In same-sex relationships, there's a lot of therapy usage, especially for women, but for men also. So I would say, proportionally speaking, there's more lesbians and queers in therapy than, represented in the population. So let's see. Oh yeah, so one thing that's true about transition to parenthood is, in general, what happens is that when a couple becomes pregnant, let's say, then the birth mother's body is changing, and she's kind of like carrying her social community with her, because she's getting a bigger and bigger body, and it's very exciting. Whereas her partner, the non-birth mother, her body is not changing. Her social community is not being taken along with her. So it's a different vibe, if you will. She's in the role of father, and men are expected and socialized to be in that role, but women are not really socialized to be in that role. So if you've got a woman in the role of father, and either that works well for her gender-wise, so she could be butch, she could be on the trans spectrum, gender variant, and she really might like the father role, like that might be what she wants, then that works out really well. But if you've got a non-birth mother who wants to mother, and even perhaps was the driving force of wanting children, and maybe she tried to get pregnant, but then she was infertile, so they switched over to the other woman, she got pregnant right away. Well, that can present problems, because then there's jealousy, there's loss, there's envy. So that's problematic. Let's see. So transition to parenthood. In general, conflict goes up, relationship satisfaction goes down. I think there's some figure like 60% of couples, their relationship satisfaction goes down. Something like 20%, 25%, it just stays the same. And then 15% or something like that, what happens is that their relationship satisfaction goes up, And
What percentage was that last one? 20?
Oh, it's something like 60, 65 go down, and then 20 are not impacted at all, and then, I don't know, whatever's left, 15 or something, have an improvement in the relationship satisfaction. This is a very hard country to be a parent in. I think that probably most places in the world, there's more support one way or another, whether it's out of extended family, whether it's out of parental leave in many places. So, the individualism in the United States really makes it hard to have to deal with becoming a parent, and there's not much support for parents in general. And if you don't have much money and you're a type of family that's an alternative type of family, it just gets harder. Well, why would relationship satisfaction go down? Why do you think that is in the transition to parenthood? Somebody want to say something about that? Because if I don't stop talking for a minute, I'll just...
Because the attention's on the baby now.
Yeah, well, what about that?
The birth mother's trying to, form a relationship with the baby, attuning with the baby.
Exactly. That's a great word for it. Yeah. And so what about that? So
What do you mean?
then it becomes a threesome, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it moves from a twosome or a dyad to a threesome. And threesome is a lot more complicated. And men are often socialized to expect that their wife is going to become really, really engaged with the baby, and she's going to be home, and in that sort of traditional position. And he may not like it, and he may not like losing her attention, That's a lot of what happens with fathers, is that that's particularly hard for them. But they're not feeling bad necessarily about their connection with the baby. They're expecting that their connection with the baby is going to get stronger over time as the kid gets older. But if you have a second parent who's a female and she's, really gendered in a pretty conventional way, has some sort of identification with being a mother, in that case, she can feel envy of her partner's connection with the baby. And then she can start to feel left out in just the way that you were saying. And it's a very preoccupying thing to have a baby. It's like, it just kind of takes over. One of the main problems in a heterosexual couple who are entering the transition to parenthood, if they're in a kind of traditional role, which we have in the Bay Area less and less, but is that they're in these different worlds. You've got the mother at home, she's in this cocoon with the baby, and it's not easy to be home 24/7 with the baby. I mean, that's a difficult thing. And then you've got the father, and he's out making money and being financially stressed. So they have this, they're in different worlds. And what they need to do is they need help in connecting. They need help in bringing his world to her and her world to him. But with a same-sex couple with two women, that's often not the case. With two women, there's often this desire to there's a very egalitarian culture in lesbian culture. Women are really, in general, socialized to be attentive to power dynamics, because women are not in the privileged position of men, and you just pay more attention to things when you're not in a privileged position. It's a different kind of marginality that gives you a different perspective. So in general, women, people who are identified as or socialized as women, they like to have things even Steven. They really are very concerned about that. And that's a pretty common kind of issue clinically, is that you could have a couple come to you after the transition to parenthood, and they're really upset because maybe things used to be more even Steven, and now they're not, and it's it's not working for somebody. So it's that kind of thing. Yeah.
Do you find that's the same as you were talking earlier about non-birth mothers who slip into that role as a father real easily? And
Yeah.
so do you find that they have as many relationship issues as the non-birth mother who really wants to be the other mother?
No. No, I don't.
Yeah.
That's the quick answer.
Yeah.
It's like you've got this birth mother, and whether the birth mother is on the trans or butch spectrum, if she wants to have a baby and she's into it, then she is in that kind of socialization of, and she's got the hormones happening. I mean, it's a whole deal. So then she's really into it in general, unless she's having a baby because her partner wanted a baby and couldn't get pregnant. And that happens sometimes. Mm-hmm. But if you've got the second parent and the second parent is frustrated, the second parent wants to soothe the baby, the second parent wants to be able to attach in a way that feels really gratifying. And if the birth mother is breastfeeding, it's a very uneven playing field. The women that I interviewed who had problems with the position of being the non-birth mother, the ones who had problems either were women who wanted to carry children themselves and weren't able to, or were gender socialized to be really, really wanting kids. They played with dolls a lot when they were young, very female or feminine kind of oriented, if you will. Or they had, their partners were breastfeeding, and the breastfeeding was going really well. If you have a birth mother who's breastfeeding the kid, and it's going beautifully, and they've got this really tight bond, then it it's just an unfair advantage, if you will. You know, what happens is that when the kid is distressed, the birth mother can pull out her breast and soothe the child, and it's like a beautiful thing for everyone. But the non-birth mother can be pretty frustrated by that, you know, if she's in that situation. Because it's frustrating. Because it's sort of like one woman I interviewed, she would say, you know, we'd both come home from work, and he would like crawl over to her, and he would just ignore me, and that was very difficult for her. Excuse me. And I would say also another thing that can make that non-birth mother position vulnerable is if somebody in that position has suffered a lot of maternal trauma herself, if there's been a lot of loss and trauma and abandonment, those feelings really get evoked when there's a baby who's not choosing you, but is choosing this other person. So I think those are the variables most salient for what makes it really hard for a non-birth mother. In terms of relationship satisfaction, the best predictor of relationship satisfaction after the transition to parenthood is relationship satisfaction before the transition to parenthood, which, you know, it's pretty obvious, you'd think of that. Often the division of labor, so the two big issues in transition to parenthood are relationship satisfaction and division of labor. With heterosexual parents or couples, division of labor is often more problematic. It's often more complicated. It's kind of like, you know, if you've got a couple where one is socialized as a man, one is socialized as a woman, then all these things like take out the garbage, cook, make, you know, everything is gendered and everything has gender associations. So a heterosexual couple is sort of always, you know, moving off of that. They're always sort of within this context of, are we going to be the way that we're supposed to be in terms of society, or are we going to be different? You know, are we feminist? What are we? And the division of labor can really be very challenging for many couples. It tends to be much less challenging for same-sex couples, which is a nice advantage. And it really has to do with, like, if you're a same-sex couple, there's no expectations exactly. You know, if you're involved and it's kind of like, well, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? It's not, the gender doesn't come into it so much in terms of being socialized both of the people as women. And I will say something about gender that the women that I interviewed, 14 of them, I think half of them had gender dynamics in their relationship where there was like a butch femme kind of dynamic, or where there was one partner who was on the butch or trans or gender variant spectrum. And when the person who was on that spectrum, let's say, wanted to have a kid, and her partner was surprised because she had been acting like a boy for a long time, and suddenly, as they get older, like, she's like, I want to have a kid. I want to be a mom. And her partner found that very difficult to accept because it was like she was changing genders on her. So that was problematic for that couple. You know, it really depends. Like, there was this exercise one time where couples were given this task to choose a vacation together. And some couples were like, I always wanted to go to Paris. Okay, fine. So it really didn't matter how they got to the decision. Sometimes one person said, this is what I want. Sometimes the other person said, this is what I want. Or sometimes they negotiated it. It really didn't matter how it was decided. What mattered was there satisfaction between them? Were they both kind of happy with the results? And that's really how relationship satisfaction is in division of labor. It doesn't really matter how it's divided at all. What matters is, does it work for the couple? And if it works for the couple, then fine, great. And when it doesn't, then somebody's unhappy. The worst thing that happens after the transition to parenthood is that there's some sort of what they call violated expectations. So it's like if you're in this couple relationship and you want to have a kid and you don't, and so one of you agrees, okay, I'll be involved, and I'm going to change diapers, and I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night, and I'm going to do that, and then they don't do it, then that's a big bummer for them. That's like, you know, it sort of seeds the resentment, and it really doesn't work well. So if you've got a couple in your office and they're talking about what are the expectations of the roles and responsibilities, then what you want to do is you really want to stress clarity, and you want to stress, like, let's be realistic. How realistic is it? Anybody have any questions at this point? Let's see. Well, I will say that for the women I interviewed, relationship satisfaction had a lot to depend on communication. Do you know, it's like Freud's question, what do women want? Well, women want to be listened to. And I would say, you know, probably most people want to be listened to. It's not just a gender, female thing. But communication was really, really important to the women that I interviewed. And they felt like as long as they were having pretty good communication with their partner, and they were sort of on the same page, that they could really go along handling whatever came up. It was really when there was like an alienated situation, or one was angry at the other, somebody wasn't talking, that made them unhappy. So, you know, in a certain way, when you do couple therapy, communication is one of the most important things. And when you've got a kid who appears on the scene, the couple has less time, less energy for one another, and the whole question is, how important is that child going to be? Can the couple prioritize one another? And it's very difficult to do that. It's especially difficult to do that if your kid is hard, doesn't sleep, colicky, or if you have twins or more kids. Very difficult then. It's easier if you live near, say, a grandparent or an aunt or somebody who like loves you and wants to be an aunt or an uncle and doesn't want to be a parent and will come in and, you know, take care of the kids some of the time. Because it's really problematic when a couple doesn't have any time off from the child. I think I do have a bias about that. I think it is really important to have couple time, and you know, everybody has their own bias about that. I know that I've worked with some couples where, you know, their kid was 1 or 2, and they'd never had a night away from the child. And I thought, well, that's really a couple who wants to be with their kid all the time. And it worked for one couple, and it didn't work for another. So it really depends on what's the couple wanting. Let's see. Yes?
How do you work with the non-birth mother who's resenting the fact that, you know, her baby, she's not forming a bond with her baby? Would you, I mean, we're talking about couples, would you bring the child in? And
well, I guess I'd want to know information. You know, one of the things, it's a good question, one of the things that really makes someone more confident as a parent is parenting. It's pretty much, how do you become a parent? You become a parent by parenting. That's really how to do it. And the more you do it, the more confidence you get. And the more you do it, the more the attachment forms. So I'd want to know things like, you know, what was the maternity leave like, or parental leave? How much time does one parent spend? How much time does the other parent spend? You know, one of the kind of classic things in a heterosexual couple is that the mother really wants to be in control, and that whatever the father does, it's not good enough. So it's very discouraging for fathers to participate. And that can happen in same-sex couples as well. A little less, I'd say, but it still can happen. So I'd want to know, like, what's the attitude of the birth mom toward the non-birth mom? Does she see that person as an equal partner? You know, in general, I would say that the healthier someone is, the better they're able to share. And for less healthy folks, I would say that there's more of a retraction, a constriction, and then there's more jealousy. It's my baby, it's not your baby. You know, I'd want to know what's the pediatrician saying about the child. Is there any sort of issues that the child's got going on? And I'd be really interested in the dynamics between the couple, with the partners, and try and get at. I mean, you know, the thing is also, like, when there are cultural differences or class differences, those things are harder to deal with. Any sort of differences are harder to deal with. You know, does one, let's see, there could be somebody who, I once worked with this family where one woman was African American, one woman was Latina, she was an immigrant, and they had very different parenting styles. And the woman who was African American was younger, quite a bit younger, and had less experience with kids than her partner did. And her partner was like, you know, the kid's crying, let the kid cry some, it's okay. And her partner, who was the birth mother, felt like, oh my God, I can't stand to hear the baby crying, you know? So that's one difference sometimes, is that for birth mothers, listening to the baby cry, it's more intense than it is for the second parent. And if you've got cultural differences where either one parent is coming from an extended family where there have been a lot of kids around, then that, you know, there's just more comfort and familiarity there. If you've got somebody who's never worked with kids before, either personally, professionally, or anything like that, that can be difficult. I interviewed one woman who said that she wanted her partner to go first because she liked her partner to do things first. She wanted to have a kid, but she really wanted to see how it was going to go over there. You know, it was like, I don't know about this. And she was very femme-identified, and her partner was very butch-identified. They both really wanted kids. And when her partner was pregnant, she said that hardly anybody recognized her partner, who was the butch one, as a pregnant person. They thought she was gaining weight. No one held the door open for her. No one gave her a seat, if you will, on the bus. It was kind of like nobody knew what to make of them. And when they went to the hospital for labor, for the birth, the hospital people were kind of like not sure what to make of them. And the woman I interviewed said, look, if the role had been reversed and I had been carrying the child, the hospital people would have been like, oh, it's a lesbian couple, we get it, you know, she's the one who's carrying the child, she's the other one who looks like the dad, okay. But because it was reversed, she said that the hospital folks were just kind of like bewildered, and it didn't feel good to her. Another example of their experience was lactation was hard for the birth mother. And so they started going to a lactation specialist after the birth. And the lactation specialist didn't understand the family dynamics, or didn't understand the composition of the family. And so what happened is that she referred to the woman I interviewed as Auntie. And she said, oh, here, you know, go to Auntie. And it took 3 weeks. It took them 2 weeks, and this couple was young. And for whatever reason, they weren't able to say, well, actually, we're both the mothers. But by the third week, the lactation specialist kind of got it. Like, oh, okay. And then she started referring to the non-birth mother as mommy. But it didn't happen easily. So some of what is really important is how recognizable is a family and where do they live. If they live in California, they're really lucky. Because here in California, we've got this law that says non-birth mothers are protected. They're recognized as parents, even if they don't take any legal action. It's a vulnerable position, and 3 of the women that I interviewed, they carried their adoption papers in their wallet. I found that very poignant because they were so uptight about it. They were so concerned that if they were with the child, maybe the child got injured and they had to go to the hospital. They were very concerned, like, how were they going to be perceived? And that makes me think about anxiety. That one of the, because of the history of lesbian parents in the 60s and the 70s, what happened was that there were heterosexual families, and then there was the feminist movement, right, the women's movement. So then, like, women started coming out, they fell in love with other women, and their husbands or former husbands were really pissed. And they took their wives to court, or their ex-wives, for custody, child custody. It was very ugly, and a lot of women lost children. Now that doesn't really happen anymore in that constellation. What's happening now is between the non-birth mother and the birth mother. So if there's not let's say that a kid is born in Florida, and there are no laws to protect the non-birth mother. So if the couple splits up, before they have put legal actions in place, the non-birth mother is dependent on her partner or her ex-partner to be recognized as a parent. And really all the laws are in place for after the couple breaks up. Because when couples start to have babies together, they're happy, usually. They're in a good place. But then as time goes on and the couple gets less happy with one another, or somebody goes out and has an affair, then what happens is the birth mother is in the power position. And she can take away the kid if there's not legal things in place. And the non-birth mother is really in a very bad position at that point.
But the adoption process basically handles that.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
It basically handles that, right? Second parent adoption. Although or step parent adoption. Not all states and not all counties in this country allow that. I think in California, I think every county has had that now. But there are some states that are very retro about that. Yeah, but if you have an adoption, one thing that people talk about legally is intention. That if you're 2 women and you have a kid together, was the intention to raise this child together and be a family? And if that is seen, then the non-birth mother is recognized as a parent. There's just a tremendous amount of invisibility if the non-birth mother is not recognized as a parent, and there can be invisibility if the family is not seen as an authentic, legitimate family. In the Bay Area, we're just so lucky because there are so many different kinds of people. But in so many other places, that's not the case. What else? Oh, so the anxiety issue it's irrational. So everybody I spoke with made legal arrangements to adopt their child. Everybody I spoke with made multiple legal arrangements. Adoption and what else did they do? I don't know. I can't remember at this moment, but there were all these different actions taken. And they were taken in part because the non-birth mother felt anxious. She just felt anxious, like, was the known donor's mother going to try and take the kid away? there was a birth mother who, her mother was from Florida and Christian, very right-wing. And they had anxiety about that person coming in to try to take their child away. So I think one of the things I think is really important is that you can't overestimate the anxiety that lesbians feel, especially non-birth mothers, in the transition to parenthood, because some of it is rational and some of it is not. But you just can't really underestimate it. Yeah, overestimate it, whatever that is. Yeah, because it's a vulnerable thing to do, to be a queer and to have kids. It's vulnerable. Especially people who travel out of the state. That's when women that I interviewed had more anxiety about that. You know, they worried about parents, they worried about the sperm donor, they worried about the sperm donor's mother. So, what else?
I have a question
Yeah.
along the lines of extended family.
Yeah.
The birth mother or the non-birth mother split up, their adoption remains in place, so each of their rights are understood. Birth mother becomes involved with someone else, so there's effectively a step-parent in the picture. Are there still rights of adoption for that step-parent
No.
if there's already an existing co-parent?
No, although that may change. My understanding is that there was a 3-parent adoption a couple of years ago in one state in this country. And that was really the first time, and I think it was like 2 lesbians and a gay man who was the sperm donor. And they were able to all be recognized as parents. But in general, that would be probably not possible. It may be in the future. You know, in terms of if the step-parent comes in and really does a lot of the parenting, maybe they'd start to recognize that person, but in general, not. Parenting is recognized either by biology or by gender. So you can have a father, you can have a mother, you can have somebody who's living with the birth mother. I guess the reason why I was less interested in thinking about adoption is because those parents are on the same page. The power dynamics are pretty similar. Nobody's exactly in a power position. And I was kind of drawn to, you know, there's a discrepancy in power here. One of the best things to do when you're working with a couple like this is to really help the birth mother validate the non-birth mother's role as parent. And that's really important. So if you've got a birth mother who's really supportive and is saying to her parents and to everybody she knows, you know, Lila is just as much of a parent as I am, then that really creates this functional, healthy family. And if you've got a birth mother who's not doing that, then that's a big problem. And you have to work with them and find out what's going on about that. What else? Any other questions? Let's see. I guess when you're working with people clinically, the more differences that exist, the harder it is. The more the discrepancy and desire for parenthood, the harder it is. The more the gender dynamics don't line up with the roles, the harder it is. Anybody else want to say anything or ask anything? We're just about done. Oh, I will say about extended families that people usually come around. Grandparents are often not supportive. I would say that that can be a tricky kind of thing, especially if the families are less educated, especially if the families are In insular types of communities where they haven't had a lot of contact with same-sex relationships, they can, and especially if they're conservative and Catholic or fundamentalist, you know, the people that I interviewed, the ones who were from the South had a more problematic type of relationship. But in general, even if the grandparents don't get on board before the child comes, they're usually able to be positively impacted. So you know how often when someone comes out to their parents and says, I'm queer, you know, I like girls, or whatever they say, it takes a while for the parents, but often they come around. Not always, but often they do, over time, over years it could take. Well, in general, if you've got a daughter who whose partner is going to be pregnant, then the parents of the non-birth mother-to-be may start out saying, who's this kid to us? You know? We don't have any connection with this kid. Because people are very biologically oriented around family. But once the child appears, it's kind of like, oh, I got another grandchild. And giving your parents a grandparent role is a very nice thing for them in general. Not all grandparents, but most of them, I think, will come around. And you know, you can help people when you just sort of encourage them in that way. So, yeah.
I was curious, in regards to the parent leave, how is it for the non-birth mother? Because maternity leave, you've been pregnant, people at the workplace see that. So I think two questions. First, the legal aspect, does the non-birth mother have that right? I don't know the California law, I'm from Europe. So.
Yeah, there is parental leave, or
Okay.
family leave.
Family leave.
Yeah, that people are eligible for. And often, I mean, it's a good question. Often, the people that I interviewed, you know, there's often a maternity leave that happens right away after the baby's born, where the birth mother is, let's say, taking, you know, a couple weeks off, a couple months off, maybe however long, depending on their, you know, class circumstances, their benefits. And then after she goes back to work, sometimes then the non-birth mother will kick in and take family leave and spin that out for a month or two or whatever they can do. You know, one thing actually that I think is important is thinking about your question and that question. Does the non-birth mother get to have contact and time with the child alone? So I think that's a really important question. Because if you've got the birth mother there all the time, who's kind of choreographing and in charge and taking over, you know, that's a drag. So you really want to be able to encourage each parent to have time with the child or the baby alone, where they can be the parent. Because that's the only way, it's, you know, hands-on. It's just how we learn. That our children are the guinea pigs, right? Just like we were. And did you, yeah, Denise?
You had another question.
Oh,
I was wondering if you ever encountered any couples where the non-birth mother was just fearful of not being able to fully love the child?
Absolutely. Yeah, especially if the non-birth mother is adopted herself or never wanted to have a child. Maybe identifies more as male, maybe had maternal abandonment. Yeah. And then the whole question is, what kind of support can that person get from her partner? I think that the support of the birth mother is really crucial. And then what are they doing? You know, what sort of actions are they doing to try to facilitate the attachment between the non-birth mom and the kid? You know, is it like bath time, going to sleep time? Because, you know, you've got these main activities of taking care of the kid. And the question is, who's going to do what? You know, there's feeding, there's changing the diaper, there's putting the child to bed. there's bath time. There's sort of several main activities. And how does the non-birth mom choose to be involved? You know, you may have a non-birth parent who works all the time, right? So then the question is, what are they going to do? But generally speaking, lesbian couples both want to both cut down on work and both move toward more childcare. That's different than a traditional heterosexual arrangement. Because usually what happens is the birth mother takes time off or gets on a mommy track then, and the father is like kicking it, you know. He's trying to really make more money and do all that. Yeah, lesbian couples really like equality, sort of to a fault. So they're going to be very invested in as much equality as they can get. And you know, the problem with that is, what kind of child is it? There are some children who are so easygoing. I interviewed a woman, she said, look, after a week, my partner couldn't breastfeed. He wasn't interested, it didn't work for her, they stopped. And she said, so we were interchangeable. You know, he didn't care. He was attached to me, he was attached to her, he was very easy. So that's a real blessing. I will say also a thing about how long does it take to get pregnant. That too can really kind of make it easier or make it less, or make it stressful. You know, some couples, I interviewed a woman who, I think she and her partner tried for like a year and a half. They totally blew through their savings, because this is really expensive. Sperm is expensive. You know, it was like $500 a pop or something. So it was very stressful for them. It's really depressing, especially for the birth mother. Inseminate, and then you see a couple weeks later what's going to happen. And it's, you know, no woman really wants to be dealing with infertility or with wanting to be pregnant and not getting pregnant. It's frustrating. And some women are like crazed for babies. Just crazed. And some people are really lucky. It happens really fast. It happens in a good way, you know? But then the other people, it just takes forever. And they really get bummed. And if you're their therapist, you know, you just gotta like keep encouraging them. But then the process is harder. So some people are lucky and some people are not, just like in all of life. Anything else? Yeah.
I was just kind of interested in how those dynamics change over time, because it seems like a lot of the power struggle has to do with the birth mother being the one that's home right away with the baby more and breastfeeding and attuned to the baby because of the birthing and having carried it. But as the child gets older, it seems like those dynamics would really change.
Exactly. That's very astute. Things get smoothed out. And so if you're seeing people who are really in the throes of that disparate attachment thing, or there's this child preference where there's a really big child preference for the birth mother and much less for the non-birth mother, that's very painful. But after a few years, 3 to 5, the kid starts developing the attachment with the non-birth parent in a very strong way. As long as that non-birth parent sort of keeps coming back and doesn't get their feelings hurt so much that they then withdraw from the child. That's what's really unfortunate. But it's just as you say. It's like, that's sort of the typical Oedipal thing of like, the kid is 3, 4, 5, and it's like, oh, the second parent is so fun. Oh, this is more fun. Because there's often a parent who's kind of more fun, and then a parent who like is tracking the doctor appointments and doing the discipline thing. I mean, because all those things have to be done. And so the question really is, how do we divide it? And if we're not dividing it in this gendered way, then how do we divide it? And it's kind of all up for grabs in some way. But yes, absolutely. If that parent can keep coming back, if you will, and showing up, the attachment will really just keep getting stronger and stronger. Yeah.
So it seems like you're really also pointing to including the developmental stages of the family's life as a whole as the child develops.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
That once baby recognizes the non-birth mom as another party.
That's right. Part of the family.
Right.
Yeah.
But then there will be maybe some jealousy, some other tensions, but everything's in motion as the child keeps developing.
Exactly.
Keeps developing.
That's right. That's why the transition to parenthood is so challenging, because it's like, oh my God, it's really new territory. And nobody exactly knows what it's going to be like. You know, nobody exactly knows, am I going to have an easy kid, a hard kid, or whatever. But then as time goes on, you get more used to it, things are in place. That's right, yeah. Exactly. One thing I'll say about language, there are different people who talked about not liking the word mom for themselves because that's more maternal, if you will, or more female. So there are women who like the term baba. One called herself mappa. One called herself papa. So there's a range of terms. And the whole thing about language is interesting because it's like there's this new social reality and the language hasn't caught up yet. So, you know, you just try and help people to figure out what they want to be called. One woman said to her partner, "You be mommy." And her partner said, "Okay, you be mama." And that worked for them. Other couples were like, oh my God, you know. It took them the entire pregnancy to figure out who was going to be called what. Because sometimes people are very attached. I want to be mommy. Like, okay, well, maybe. But what does she want? So it's like, you know, you just got to work it out. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.